there was a 5-year waiting list, and we got a rotary telephone. But it dramatically changed our lives. People would come to our house to make calls to their loved ones. I would have to go all the way to the hospital to get blood test records, and it would take 2 hours to go. And they would say, sorry, it's not ready, come back the next day. 2 hours to come back. And that became a 5-minute thing. So as a kid, this light bulb went in my head, this power of technology to kind of change people's lives. We had no running water. It was a massive drought. So they would get water in these trucks, maybe 8 buckets per household. So me and my brother, sometimes my mom, we would wait in line, get that and bring it back home. Many years later, we had running water and we had a water heater, and you could get hot water to take a shower. For me, everything was discreet like that. And so I've always had this thing, first-hand feeling of how technology can dramatically change your life and the opportunity it brings. I think if freedom is actually high, at some point, all of humanity is aligned in making sure that's not the case, right? And so we'll actually make more progress against it, I think. So the irony is, so there is a self-modulating aspect there. I think if humanity collectively puts their mind to solving a problem, whatever it is, I think we can get there. So because of that, I think I'm optimistic on the P-Doom scenarios. But that doesn't mean, I think the underlying risk is actually pretty high. But I have a lot of faith in humanity kind of rising up to meet that moment.
Take me through that experience when there's all these articles saying you're the wrong guy to lead Google through this. Google is lost. It's done. It's over. The following is a conversation with Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google and Alphabet, on this, the Lex Friedman podcast. Your life story is inspiring to a lot of people. It's inspiring to me. You grew up in India, whole family living in a humble 2-room apartment, very little, almost no access to technology. And from those humble beginnings, you rose to lead a $2 trillion technology company. So if you could travel back in time and told that, let's say, 12-year-old Sundar, that you're now leading one of the largest companies in human history, what do you think that young kid would say?
I would have probably laughed it off. Probably too far-fetched to imagine or believe at that time.
You would have to explain the internet first.
For sure. Computers to me at that time, I was 12 in 1984. So probably, by then I started reading about them. I hadn't seen one.
What was that place like? Take me to your childhood.
I grew up in Chennai. It's in south of India. It's a beautiful, bustling city. Lots of people, lots of energy. Simple life. Definitely fond memories of playing cricket outside the home. We just used to play on the streets. All the neighborhood kids would come out and we would play till it got dark and we couldn't play anymore. Barefoot. Traffic would come. We would just stop the game. Everything would drive through and you would just continue playing, right? Just to kind of get the visual in your head. Pre-computers, there's a lot of free time. Now that I think about it, now you have to go and seek that quiet solitude or something. Newspapers, books is how I gained access to the world's information at the time, you will. My grandfather was a big influence. He worked in the post office. He was so good with language. His English, his handwriting till today is the most beautiful handwriting I've ever seen. He would write so clearly. He was so articulate. And so he kind of got me introduced into books. He loved politics. So we could talk about anything. And, that was there in my family throughout. So lots of books, trashy books, good books, everything from Ayn Rand to books on philosophy to stupid crime novels. So books was a big part of my life. But that kind of, this whole, it's not surprising I ended up at Google because Google's mission kind of always resonated deeply with me. This access to knowledge, I was hungry for it. But definitely have, fond memories of my childhood. Access to knowledge was there. So that's the wealth we had. Every aspect of technology, I had to wait for a while. I've obviously spoken before about how long it took for us to get a phone, about 5 years, but it's not the only thing.
A telephone.
There was a 5-year waiting list, and we got a rotary telephone.
Mm-hmm.
But it dramatically changed our lives. People would come to our house to make calls to their loved ones. I would have to go all the way to the hospital to get blood test records, and it would take 2 hours to go. And they would say, sorry, it's not ready. Come back the next day. 2 hours to come back. And that became a 5-minute thing. So as a kid, this light bulb went in my head, this power of technology to kind of change people's lives. We had no running water. It was a massive drought. So they would get water in these trucks, maybe 8 buckets per household. So me and my brother, sometimes my mom, we would wait in line, get that and bring it back home. Many years later, like we had running water and we had a water heater, and you could get hot water to take a shower. For me, everything was discreet like that. And so I've always had this thing, first-hand feeling of like how technology can dramatically change like your life and like the opportunity it brings. So, that was kind of a subliminal takeaway for me throughout growing up. And, I kind of actually observed it and felt it. So we had to convince my dad for a long time to get a VCR. Do you know what a VCR is? Yeah. I'm trying to date you now.
Yeah.
But, because before that, you only had like kind of one TV channel, right? That's it. And so, you can watch movies or something like that. But this was by the time I was in 12th grade, we got a VCR. It was like a Panasonic, which we had to go to some like shop, which had kind of smuggled it in, I guess. And that's where we bought a VCR. But then being able to record like a World Cup football game and then, or like get bootleg videotapes and watch movies, like all that. So like, I had these discrete memories growing up. And so, always left me with the feeling of like how getting access to technology drives that step change in your life.
I don't think you'll ever be able to equal the first time you get hot water.
To have that convenience of going and opening a tap and have hot water come out, yeah.
It's interesting. We take for granted the progress we've made. If you look at human history, just those plots that look at GDP across 2,000 years, and you see that exponential growth to where most of the progress happened since the Industrial Revolution. And we just take for granted. We forget how far we've gone. So our ability to understand how great we have it and also how quickly technology can improve is quite poor.
Oh, it's extraordinary. I go back to India now, the power of mobile. It's mind-blowing to see the progress through the arc of time. It's phenomenal.
What advice would you give to young folks listening to this all over the world who look up to you and find your story inspiring? Who want to be maybe the next Sundar Pichai, who want to create companies, build something that has a lot of impact in the world?
Look, you have a lot of luck along the way, but you obviously have to make smart choices. You're thinking about what you want to do. Your brain is telling you something. But when you do things, I think it's important to kind of get that, listen to your heart and see whether you actually enjoy doing it, right? That feeling of if you love what you do, it's so much easier and you're going to see the best version of yourself. And it's easier said than done. I think it's tough to find things you love doing. But I think kind of listening to your heart a bit more than your mind in terms of figuring out what you want to do, I think is one of the best things I would tell people. The second thing is, trying to work with people who you feel at various points in my life, I've worked with people who I felt were better than me. Right? Kind of like, you almost are sitting in a room talking to someone and they're like, wow, like, and you want that feeling a few times, trying to get yourself in a position where you're working with people who you feel are kind of like stretching your abilities is what helps you grow, I think. So putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. And I think often you'll surprise yourself. So I think being open-minded enough to kind of put yourself in those positions is maybe another thing I would say.
What lessons can we learn, maybe from an outsider perspective, for me, looking at your story and gotten to know you a bit? You're humble, you're kind. Usually when I think of somebody who has had a journey like yours and climbs to the very top of leadership, they're usually in a cutthroat world, they're usually going to be a bit of an asshole. So what wisdom are we supposed to draw from the fact that your general approach is of balance, of humility, of kindness, listening to everybody? What's your secret?
I do get angry. I do get frustrated. I have the same emotions all of us do, right, in the context of work and everything. But a few things, right? I think, over time, I figured out the best way to get the most out of people. You kind of find mission-oriented people who are on the shared journey, who have this inner drive to excellence, to do the best, and you kind of motivate people, and you can achieve a lot that way, right? And so it often tends to work out that way. But have there been times like I lose it? Yeah, but not maybe less often than others, and maybe over the years, less and less so, because I find it's not needed to achieve what you need to do.
So losing your shit has not been productive.
Yeah, less often than not. I think
Okay.
people respond to that.
Yeah.
They may do stuff to react to that, like what you actually want them to do the right thing, and so maybe there's a bit of like sports. I'm a sports fan. In football, coaches in soccer, that football, people often talk about like man management, right? Great coaches do, right? I think there is an element of that in our lives. How do you get the best out of the people you work with? At times you're working with people who are so committed to achieving. If they've done something wrong, they feel it more than you do, right? So you treat them differently than occasionally there are people who you need to clearly let them know, like, that wasn't okay or whatever it is. But I've often found that not to be the case.
And sometimes the right words at the right time, spoken firmly, can reverberate through time.
Also, sometimes the unspoken words. People can sometimes see that, like, you're unhappy without you saying it. And so sometimes the silence can deliver that message even more.
Sometimes less is more. Who's the greatest soccer player of all time? Messi or Ronaldo or Pele or Maradona?
I'm going to make, in this question.
Is this going to be a political answer?
No. I will tell the truthful answer because the
So it's
truthful
Messi.
answer.
Okay.
It is. It's been interesting because my son is a big Cristiano Ronaldo fan. And so we've had to watch El Clasicos together, with that dynamic in there. I so admire CR7's. I mean, I've never seen an athlete more committed to that kind of excellence. And so he's one of the all-time greats. But, for me, Messi is it.
Yeah, when I see Lionel Messi, you just are in awe that humans are able to achieve that level of greatness and genius and artistry. When we'll talk about AI, maybe robotics and this kind of stuff. That level of genius, I'm not sure you can possibly match by AI in a long time. It's just an example of greatness. And you have that kind of greatness in other disciplines, but in sport, you get to visually see it, unlike anything else. And just the timing, the movement, this is genius.
I had the chance to see him a couple of weeks ago. He played in San Jose, so against the Quakes. So I went to see the game. I was a fan had good seats, knew where he would play in the second half, hopefully. And even at his age, just watching him when he gets the ball, that movement, you're right, that special quality. It's tough to describe, but you feel it when you see it, yeah.
He still got it. If we rank all the technological innovations throughout human history, let's go back maybe the history of human civilizations 12,000 years ago. And you rank them by how much of a productivity multiplier they've been. So we can go to electricity or the labor mechanization of the Industrial Revolution, or we can go back to the first agricultural revolution 12,000 years ago. In that long list of inventions, do you think AI, when history is written 1,000 years from now, do you think it has a chance to be the number one productivity multiplier?
It's a great question. Look, many years ago, I think it might have been 2017 or 2018, I said at the time, like, AI is the most profound technology humanity will ever work on. It'll be more profound than fire or electricity. So I have to back myself. I still think that's the case. When you asked this question, I was thinking, well, do we have a recency bias, right? Like in sports, it's very tempting to call the current person you're seeing the greatest player, right? And so is there a recency bias? And, I do think from first principles, I would argue AI will be bigger than all of those. I didn't live through those moments. 2 years ago, I had to go through a surgery, and then I processed that there was a point in time people didn't have anesthesia when they went through these procedures. At that moment, I was like, that has got to be the greatest invention humanity has ever done, right? So, look, we don't know what it is to have lived through those times. But, and many of what you're talking about were kind of this general things which pretty much affected everything, electricity or internet, etc. But I don't think we've ever dealt with a technology, both which is progressing so fast, becoming so capable. It's not clear what the ceiling is. And the main unique, it's recursively self-improving, right? It's capable of that. And so the fact it's the first technology will kind of dramatically accelerate creation itself, like creating things, building new things, can improve and achieve things on its own, right? I think like puts it in a different league, right? And so different league. And so I think the impact it will end up having will far surpass everything we've seen before. Obviously, with that comes a lot of important things to think and wrestle with, but I definitely think that'll end up being the case.
Especially if it gets to the point of where we can achieve superhuman performance on the AI research itself. So it's the technology that it's an open question, but it may be able to achieve a level to where the technology itself can create itself better than it could yesterday.
It's like the move 37 of alpha research or whatever it is,
Yeah.
right? Like, and when yeah, you're right. When it can do novel, self-directed research, obviously for a long time we'll have hopefully always humans in the loop and all that stuff. And these are complex questions to talk about. But yes, I think the underlying technology, I've said this, like if you watched seeing AlphaGo start from scratch, be clueless, and like become better through the course of a day, really it hits you when you see that happen. Even our like the VO3 models, if you sample the models when they were like 30% done and 60% done and looked at what they were generating, and you kind of see how it all comes together, it's kind of like, I would say, it's kind of inspiring, a little bit unsettling, right, as a human. So all of that is true, I think.
Well, the interesting thing of the Industrial Revolution, electricity, like you mentioned, we can go back to the first agricultural revolution. There's what's called the Neolithic package of the first agricultural revolution. It wasn't just that the nomads settled down and started planting food, but all this other kind of technology was born from that, and it's included in this package. So it wasn't one piece of technology. There's these ripple effects, second and third order effects that happen. Everything from something profound, like pottery that can store liquids and food, to something we kind of take for granted, but social hierarchies and political hierarchies. So like early government was formed because it turns out if humans stop moving and have some surplus food, they start coming up with they get bored and they start coming up with interesting systems, and then trade emerges, which turns out to be a really profound thing. And like I said, government there's just second and third order effects from that, including that package, is incredible and probably extremely difficult. If you ask one of the people in the nomadic tribes to predict that, it would be impossible. It's difficult to predict. But all that said, what do you think are some of the early things we might see in the quote unquote AI package?
I mean, most of it probably we don't know today, but like, the one thing which we can tangibly start seeing now is, obviously with the coding progress, you got a sense of it. It's going to be so easy to imagine, like thoughts in your head, translating that into things that exist. That'll be part of the package, right? Like it's going to empower almost all of humanity to kind of express themselves. Maybe in the past you could have expressed with words, but like you could kind of build things into existence, right? Maybe not fully today. We are at the early stages of vibe coding. I've been amazed at what people have put out online with VO3, but it takes a bit of work, right? You have to stitch together a set of prompts, but all this is going to get better. The thing I always think about, this is the worst it'll ever be, right? Like at any given moment in time.
Yeah, it's interesting you went there as kind of a first thought. So an exponential increase of access to creativity.
Software creation. Are you creating a program, a piece of content to be shared with others? Games down the line, all of that like just becomes infinitely more possible.
Well, I think the big thing is that it makes it accessible. It unlocks the cognitive capabilities of the entire 8 billion.
No, I agree. Look, think about 40 years ago, maybe in the US, there were 5 people who could do what you were doing, like go do a interview, but today think about with YouTube and other products, etc., like how many more people are doing it. So I think this is what technology does, right? Like when the internet created blogs, you heard from so many more people. So I think, but with AI, I think that number won't be in the few hundreds of thousands. It'll be tens of millions of people, maybe even a billion people, like putting out things into the world in a deeper way.
And I think it'll change the landscape of creativity. And it makes a lot of people nervous. Like, for example, whatever, Fox, MSNBC, CNN are really nervous about this part. Like, you mean this dude in a suit could just do this? And YouTube and thousands of others, tens of thousands, millions of other creators can do the same kind of thing. That makes them nervous. And now you get a podcast from Notebook LM. It's about 5 to 10 times better than any podcast I've ever done.
Not true, but yeah.
I'm joking at this time, but maybe not. And that changes. You have to evolve because on the podcasting front, I'm a fan of podcasts much more than I am a fan of being a host or whatever. If there's great podcasts that are both AIs, I'll just stop doing this podcast. I'll listen to that podcast. But you have to evolve and you have to change. And that makes people really nervous, I think. But it's also a really exciting future.
The only thing I may say is I do think, like, in a world in which there are two AI, I think people value and choose, just like in chess. You and I would never watch Stockfish 10 or whatever and AlphaGo play against each. Like, it would be boring for us to watch. But Magnus Carlsen and Gukesh, that game would be much more fascinating to watch. So it's tough to say. Like, one way to say is you'll have a lot more content, and so you will be listening to AI generated content because sometimes it's efficient, etc. But the premium experiences you value might be a version of like the human essence wherever it comes through. Going back to what we talked earlier about watching Messi dribble the ball. I don't know, one day I'm sure a machine will dribble much better than Messi, but I don't know whether it would evoke that same emotion in us. So I think that'll be fascinating to see.
I think the element of podcasting or audiobooks that is about information gathering, that part might be removed, or that might be more efficiently and in a compelling way done by AI. But then it'll be just nice to hear humans struggle with the information, contend with the information, try to internalize it, combine it with the complexity of our own emotions and consciousness and all that kind of stuff. But if you actually want to find out about a piece of history, you go to Gemini. If you want to see Lex struggle with that history, then you look, or other humans, you look at that. But that's the point, is it's going to change the nature, continue to change the nature of how we discover information, how we consume the information, how we create that information. The same way that YouTube changed everything completely, changed news, and that's something our society is struggling with.
Yeah, YouTube enabled. I mean, you know this better than anyone else. It's enabled so many creators. There's no doubt in me that, like, we will enable more filmmakers than there have ever been, right? You're going to empower a lot more people. So I think there is an expansionary aspect of this, which is underestimated, I think it'll unleash human creativity in a way that hasn't been seen before. It's tough to internalize. The only way is if you brought someone from the 50s or 40s and just put them in front of YouTube, I think it would blow their mind away. Similarly, I think we would get blown away by what's possible in a 10 to 20 year time frame.
Do you think there's a future? How many years out is it that, let's say, let's put a marker on it, 50% of content in good content, 50% of good content is generated by VO4, 5, 6?
I think it depends on what it is for. Like, maybe if you look at movies today with CGI, there are great filmmakers. Like, you still look at like who the directors are and who use it. There are filmmakers who don't use it at all. You value that. There are people who use it incredibly. Think about somebody like a James Cameron, like what he would do with these tools in his hands. But I think there'll be a lot more content created. Like, just like writers today use Google Docs and not think about the fact that they're using a tool like that. Like, people will be using the future versions of these things. Like, it won't be a big deal at all to them.
I've gotten a chance to get to know Darren Aronofsky well. He's been really leaning in and trying to figure out. It's fun to watch a genius who came up before any of this was even remotely possible. He created Pi, one of my favorite movies, and from there just continued to create a really interesting variety of movies. And now he's trying to see how can AI be used to create compelling films. You have people like that. You have people, I've gotten to just know edgier folks. They're AI first, like Door Brothers. Both Aronofsky and Door Brothers create at the edge of the Overton window of society. You know, they push whether it's sexuality or violence. It's edgy, like artists are, but it's still classy. It doesn't cross that line, whatever that line is. You know, Hunter S. Thompson has this line that the only way to find out where the edge, where the line is by crossing it. And I think for artists, that's true. That's kind of their purpose. Sometimes comedians and artists just cross that line. I wonder if you can comment on the weird place that puts Google. Because Google's line is probably different than some of these artists. How do you think about specifically VO and Flow about like how to allow artists to do crazy shit, but also like the responsibility of like not for it not to be too crazy.
I mean, it's a great question. Look, you mentioned Darren, he's a clear visionary, right? Part of the reason we started working with him early on VO is he's one of those people who's able to kind of see that future, get inspired by it, and kind of showing the way for how creative people can express themselves with it. Look, I think when it comes to allowing artistic free expression, it's one of the most important values in a society, right? I think, artists have always been the ones to push boundaries, expand the frontiers of thought. And so, look, I think that's going to be an important value we have. So I think we will provide tools and put it in the hands of artists for them to use and put out their work. Those APIs, I mean, I almost think of that as infrastructure. Just like when you provide electricity to people or something, you want them to use it, and like you're not thinking about the use cases on top of it. So
it's a paintbrush.
Yeah, and so I think that's how. Obviously, there have to be some things, and society needs to decide at a fundamental level what's okay, what's not. We'll be responsible with it, but I do think when it comes to artistic free expression, I think that's one of those values we should work hard to defend.
I wonder if you can comment on maybe earlier versions of Gemini were a little bit careful on the kind of things you would be willing to answer. I just want to comment on, I was really surprised and pleasantly surprised and enjoyed the fact that Gemini 2.5 Pro is a lot less careful in a good sense. Don't ask me why, but I've been doing a lot of research on Genghis Khan and the Aztecs. So there's a lot of violence there in that history. It's a very violent history. I've also been doing a lot of research on World War I and World War II. And earlier versions of Gemini were very basically this kind of sense, are you sure you want to learn about this? And now it's actually very factual, objective, talks about very difficult parts of human history and does so with nuance and depth. It's been really nice. But there's a line there that I guess Google has to kind of walk. I wonder if it's also an engineering challenge, how to do that at scale across all the weird queries that people ask. Can you just speak to that challenge? How do you allow Gemini to say, again, pardon my French, crazy shit, but not too crazy?
I think one of the good insights here has been, as the models are getting more capable, the models are really good at this stuff, right? And so I think in some ways, maybe a year ago, the models weren't fully there. So they would also do stupid things more often. And so, you're trying to handle those edge cases, but then you make a mistake in how you handle those edge cases and it compounds. But I think with 2.5, what we particularly found is once the models cross a certain level of intelligence and sophistication, they are able to reason through these nuanced issues pretty well. And I think users really want that, right? Like, you want as much access to the raw model as possible, right? But I think it's a great area to think about. Like, over time, we should allow more and more closer access to it. Maybe obviously let people custom prompts if they wanted to, and experiment with it, etc. I think that's an important direction. But look, the first principles we want to think about it is, from a scientific standpoint, like making sure the models, and I'm saying scientific in the sense of like how you would approach math or physics or something like that, from first principles, having the models reason about the world, be nuanced, etc. From the ground up is the right way to build these things, right? Not like some subset of humans kind of hard coding things on top of it. So I think it's the direction we've been taking, and I think you'll see us continue to push in that direction.
Yeah, I actually asked, I gave these notes, I took extensive notes, and I gave them to Gemini and said, can you ask a novel question that's not in these notes. And Gemini continues to really surprise me. Really surprised me. It's been really beautiful. It's an incredible model. The question it generated was, you, meaning Sundar, told the world Gemini's churning out 480 trillion tokens a month. What's the most life-changing 5-word sentence hiding in that haystack? That's a Gemini question. But it gave me a sense. I don't think you can answer that, but it woke me up to like all of these tokens are providing little aha moments for people across the globe. So that's like learning. Those tokens are people are curious, they ask a question and they find something out, and it truly could be life-changing.
Oh, it is. I had the same feeling about search many years ago. You definitely